Welcome back to the Pole Position YouTube channel, and we got the Chinese Grand Prix race review. What a race we'll gift it to once again. Yesterday, battling for the final step of the podium, a full Mercedes-based podium with Lewis Hamilton getting his first podium for Ferrari, battered through the midfield. McLaren's not getting to the grid. Once again, an Audi not getting to the grid. Aston Martin's once again flopping, but look, we had a bit of everything in this race here. A lot to talk about, and most importantly, I've left here to last the biggest talking point of the race in general. Kimi Antonelli wins from pole. Youngest pole sitter, youngest winner, the first Italian winner, I think since Fisichella, I was saying. Fantastic race win from Kimi Antonelli, or should I say Kimi Raikkonen? That announced Kimi Raikkonen when he went up onto the podium. But what a dominant display from Antonelli. I was worried last week, and I said it in the ratings. I gave him a 6 out of 10 for Australia. I said, well, this is by far the quickest car. You got to compete for the race win, and this one here got on pole, maybe a bit lucky due to George Russell having some problems with his car, getting stuck in first gear in Q3, but got the pole position. And from there, we know the Ferraris got off the line well. They got past him. But the way he was able to find his way past, and then obviously with the safety car as well, Ferrari started well from the safety car. They get better fire up of the tyres, and they look quicker off the restart. But once he got that position, once he got past the Ferraris, he just controlled the race, kept it about a good 8-9 second gap at the front of the field. And by the time George Russell fought his way through past the Ferraris, it was a good 9 seconds. And from there, Anthony controlled the race. And that's what we were questioning this season. If Kimi Anthony has that ability to control races and own races, and I gave him the props for getting second place in a race that in a weekend, to be honest, that he struggled in Australia. He really did never really get to grips that weekend, but still got second place. Fantastic work. Poor start in Australia, poor start in the sprint. And then in this race here, when he's on pole, gets a really good start, still gets jumped by the Ferraris, but works his way back through. And once he was in at the front of the field in P1, just owned the race. And that is a sign of maturity. That is a sign of stepping up to the occasion. And with Bono as his engineer, a lot said about Bono yesterday because of how Lewis Hamilton was up there as well. And Anthony's first win with Bono as his engineer. You've got a veteran experience, if you would, in the engineering field. In terms of Bono, you've got the veteran in terms of Toto Wolff, got the veteran team in Mercedes. So you've got everything around him to be successful and achieve the most here. But it's about now down to the driver, and I think George Russell has looked quick over large periods of time, quickest in the sprint qualifying, sprint pole, own that sprint race, quickest in Australia by a long way. Things didn't go his way in quali, but you think, he'll make his way back to the field and then challenge Kimi Antonelli. But on race day, Kimi looked punchier. He got past the Ferraris quicker. He built that gap, and George struggled. He was complaining of the Ferraris being quicker in the important areas, which I think they were, through sector 1, very, very punchy out of turn 1 and through that middle sector, the technical period there. Had enough overspeed on the backtrack to keep ahead of George Russell. But for Kimi Antonelli, he flew past both of them. So he had the pace and he deserved the victory. And I think it's a massive step for him mentally. He got the good race start. That's that ticked off now. He's got that first race victory. That's that ticked off now. And we look at the driver standings, 4 points back, and it's sort of all been about George Russell so far this season. Yet Kimi Antonelli is 4 points back in the championship for the drivers. And that's a massive confidence boost for Kimi, because I think it would have been lingering over his head, and it would have been a worry if he hadn't picked up a win in the side the first sort of 5 to 6 races of the season. Japan up next. It's a very, very technical track, high speeds, hard to overtake. Obviously, this year, these cars look like they're fantastic to overtake with, but we know how hard it can be to overtake in Japan. George Russell gets pole, runs away with it. You think in 3 consecutive races and a sprint race, which George has run away with it and won those races, going into that month-long break, it'll be sitting in Kimi's head, missed opportunities, I need to pounce back. And that's where, pressure builds. I think that's what Lando Norris came to learn last season, how to manage pressure, how to deal with expectations and the expectation of a winning car, and had to win in the best car. It took him some time. It looked like Piastri had it, but then he lost it later in the season. And I think over 22 races this season, it's going to be about, especially for Antonelli, is riding the highs and lows and not making the highs up here and the lows way, way down there. It's about having, that sort of peaks and troughs being very close together, because that's what George Russell is. George Russell's a very steady Eddie driver. There's not much drama with him in terms of, now that Max Verstappen's not near the front of the grid, there's never really drama involved with George Russell's racing. He's a very efficient driver. He's very Mercedes in the fact that there's not much with him in terms of, he's not uber aggressive, he's not very slow, doesn't make many mistakes. Kimi is the young, sophomore year driver. We saw at times he threw away opportunities last season, expectation with the car on him this season, and he stepped up to the occasion in race 2, which is a massive, massive hurdle to jump for him. And I think that will give him so much confidence going into Japan. And if he can get another positive result in Japan, potentially even beat Russell in that race, that you're almost going level. He might actually will be ahead of George Russell going into that month-long break. And look, you can say a lot about, I guess, should races have been rescheduled or should we put 2 more races in there? But I think despite the break being annoying for all of us F1 fans, missing Formula 1 for a whole month, like another summer break, it's going to be massive for a lot of these teams. And we'll speak about McLaren. We'll speak about the Aston Martins and the Red Bulls. It'll be a great chance for them to catch up. But for a team like Mercedes, even Ferrari, you want to continue that momentum. You want to continue those good vibes and good feelings of the racing. But equally so, if Antonelli had not won this race and not won the next race, it'd be that whole month of thinking, oh, gee, I got to catch up 12 points already after 3 races. How can I close the gap? But now that he's won a race and controlled it and really outdone his teammate in the Shanghai race, the confidence is there with the Italian. The belief is there. And I just think, obviously, the back end steps out in 15 on the final lap, and he had that lock up 3 laps to go. So there's going to be, there's moments there, and it's going to happen with a young driver like Kimi Antonelli, 19 years of age. But for the most part, that was very professionally done. And they said Kimi Raikkonen, when he went up to the podium, it was a Kimi Raikkonen-esque controlled type race. No nonsense. Got the elbows out when he had to, got the pass done early, and from there, once he was in the lead, just owned the race. So fantastic win for Kimi Antonelli. So happy for him. So happy for our title, chances here that we're going to get at least a fight. Kimi Antonelli isn't going to go down with a whimper. George Russell is going to have it his own way. We might not get too much on-track racing because we know Mercedes is very big on, the team comes first. We don't want to overdo it after Rosberg and Hamilton a few years ago. So it might be about who's quick in the early periods, who can get that gap early on, and who's not stuck fighting the Ferraris. Because we'll come to our second talking point, the Ferraris. Well, they gifted us hell of a race. Back and forth, proper ding-dong battle in this one here. Lewis Hamilton in the end coming out on top, getting that final spot on the podium. And I think a lot of people said it, should they have fought? Should they not have fought? Should they work together to try and close the gap to Mercedes? Look, they end up about, how far back are they in the end of this race here? Lewis Hamilton's 20 seconds back of Russell, 25 back of Kimi Antonelli, and Leclerc, and he's 30 seconds back. They're not competing with the Mercedes right now. I want to see them fight. We want to see wheel-to-wheel racing. And can I just get that out the way early? That is 2 great drivers going head-to-head. The fact that they, I think, nearly touched once around 2, or just coming out of 1, but the side-by-side action, some deploying out of 16 onto that pit straight, some deploying down the main back straight there, wobbles out of 15. It had it all, but they were side-by-side. They never really push it off the track. They didn't make big contact. That's all body work come off the car. It was just great wheel-to-wheel racing. And this is what we all wish we got last year with McLaren, but papaya rules got in the way. We could never see this with Mercedes, with Rosberg and Hamilton coming too close too often, and the contact, and Vettel and Hamilton, we never really got to see much of that wheel-to-wheel racing. This was proper side-by-side through almost the whole of Sector 1 at times. Where did they got the 1 and 2 off the line. Fantastic jump from Hamilton, and Leclerc followed him through. They did their best in the early moments. The Merc then getting past both Ferraris before that safety car, but even after the safety car, Russell gets past just after the restart. But once Russell got past them, they never really looked too much slower than George Russell in terms of before they started fighting each other, they were staying with the Mercedes. So I get where people come from in terms of, look, their race pace is very, very close. I think Ferrari have got a great race pace package. They're a good 3 or 4 tenths quicker in the corners. It's just that they're a good 8, 9 tenths slower than the Merc on the straights. And with that big, long back straight and both cars struggling for energy deployment off 16 onto the pit straight, they always were behind Mercedes in that sort of component of the race. I think, lap 25 is when, the hammer and tongue type fighting with Leclerc and Hamilton got going, battling away through lap 27, and then Russell eventually getting past Lewis on lap 27 and Leclerc on lap 29. I think by then, I think the P1 podcast boys mentioned it, the Ferraris get better, tyre fire up. They got that off the restart of the safety car to put that gap between Russell. But because they get that quicker fire up, it means those tyres degrade much quicker. And I just think by 27, 29, where Russell got past both Lewis and Leclerc, the tyres were going a little bit earlier for the Ferraris. They got a little bit more graining earlier on, and it made it easier for the Mercs once they got past the Ferraris, that the Ferraris never really fight back. But then once Russell got past, we looked at one of the great battles between those two there. Massive lockup for Leclerc in lap 36 after he got past Hamilton to allow Lewis back through down into turn 2. Leclerc, though, back down the inside of Lewis Hamilton on lap 39. Hamilton back down the inside of Leclerc into turn 1 on lap 40. It was a proper ding-dong battle back and forth. And I just loved, if you had a seat on that pit straight, because you can see then that long right-hander of 1 and into 2. The way that Lewis through the sprint and then in the race with Leclerc were going literally wheel to wheel into 1 and into 2 and bassing away as they approached 3. It was just pure racing. It was a great watch. I know people have mentioned it's almost like, the F2 type racing where cars can just go side by side due to the size of the cars. I really like, and I keep saying this, I'm still not so massive on this whole energy deployment and the fire up at the start, but I'm so big on the new aero package and the smaller cars and the lighter cars, because you can go side by side through 1 and through 2, and out of 15 we've got them going side by side approaching the main pit straight. It creates for 2 into 1. Like, these new cars are allowed to go 2 into 1 and they can follow much better, so then the overtake mode and the boost mode can have an impact. I just think the design of these new cars and the size of them makes it some great racing. And these two, Leclerc and Hamilton, the way they raced each other made for great racing as well. And Charles comes out post-race or on the radio and says, that was a lot of fun. It really was. As a racing watcher and fan, and then as racing drivers or enthusiasts, you just watch that and sit back and go, firstly, oh shit, because they're going to touch. Then following that, you think, oh wow, like that is pure racing. The ground effect cars were heavier and broader, and look, there was opportunities in one over the last few years, but for the first bit you couldn't follow down the pit straight because of the dirty air, and then once you get into one, it's so hard to go side by side because of how fat and how wide and how bulky and cumbersome those cars were, but how light and nimble and sort of on edge these new cars are, and how small they are. We're getting side by side through 1. Like, we had it so many times in the sprint race for Lewis. Lewis loved the outside, which came the inside into 2. We saw him do it again here in the full race in the GP. We saw him get the big jump off the line and go down the inside on the first lap as well. These new cars just create for such good side-by-side, wheel-to-wheel racing, and that's what we want to see as F1 fans and racing fans, is under braking. What can you do? What can you show us? So fair play to Ferrari for allowing those two to fight. I don't agree with people who say they should have not fought and competed. Look, they could have stayed with Russell, but that Mercedes car is just an absolute weapon. They're so far back, 20 seconds back of Russell. So even if they did work as a team, they were never really going to get close to the Mercedes. They're just in a world of their own right now. And I think for Ferrari, the fact they're getting threes in P3, P4, back-to-back races, that they're causing problems in the sprint, that they're causing problems off the line, they're looking better in tyre fire up, they're so much quicker in the corners. There's going to be tracks that are going to come to them as we go to the European swing and get more traditional circuits. But then also, if they can develop the car in terms of maximizing the engine, improving the aero package even more downforce as we approach high downforce circuits coming up. I think Fred Vasseur said we're a good 5/10ths back over 1 lap pace of the Merc. He's not going to try and make the engine 5/10ths quick. He's going to get a 10th out of the engine, a 10th out of the aero package, add a 10th in terms of the drag reduction. Like, he's going to add a 10th to all parts of the car and make it just a beast. Because right now, the Mercedes is a rocket ship and the Ferrari is a great car in the corners. It is a great car in race trim. It is a great car to drive and to race. And I think that's what's reinvigorated Lewis. That is what has made Charles happy to be fine to be in P4, because those two know if they can stay close enough to this Mercedes, come the end of this season, maybe into next season, they're going to have a really, really racy package. And look, the teams will get better at the start sequence, but for the time being, as long as they qualify in the second row or even the third row of the grid, they're going to get to P1 into turn 1. Like, think about Monza. They're going to get that far up. They're going to be well and truly down the road as we get into the chicane, because they're so quick off the line that these Mercedes, the Red Bull in particular, Alpine, Haas, McLaren's not too bad for the line, but no one can go with the Ferraris off the line. They are unbelievable, and I just applaud this side because, okay, they're not the Mercedes, but in the last few seasons we've seen Ferrari make subtle improvements, but never really close that gap and never look like they've got a car that can win a race. This car, with a few tweaks and maybe things going their way, looks like it can win a race. It looks like a proper race spec package, and that's really exciting for me, and that's really exciting for F1 fans around the world. And fair play to Fred Vasseur, fair play to the team back in Maranello there, because they've made a very, very good car that's very good in race trim. And fair play to the engineers and the staff on the pit lane that allowed these two to fight, because Hamilton and Leclerc banging tyres over 10 laps, 12 laps and racing. It was such a good watch. So fair play to Ferrari, P3, P4 in the race. In terms of the drivers, Charles Leclerc leads Hamilton by a point. He's 17 back of George Russell. They're not a million miles away. I don't think they're expecting to win the constructors nor the drivers. But I think if we get some sort of like Red Bull type redemption arc in terms of what we saw last year with McLaren, as the season goes on, Ferrari can start to close that gap. More wins for Ferrari come the end of the season. Maybe they get a small chance to maybe do something if these Mercedes, if one of the drivers don't just go clear. Because if they start sharing wins and Ferrari getting 3-4s and maybe nicking a few P2s in there as well as the season goes on, once we get towards the back end of the European swing, as we come back into the last sort of 5 to 8 races, we might be having a long shot for maybe a Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton to push for the title. But so good to see those two happy. So good to see those two racing. In particular, Lewis Hamilton back on the podium. The first time he's done that with Ferrari in Scarlet Red. It was a really, really good sight to see. So fantastic weekend for Lewis Hamilton in general. Loves the Shanghai circuit. Loves racing in China. Obviously got that sprint win last year, so the question still remains is, can he continue this form onwards? He loves racing around China. He's so good around China. Can we see it now into Japan, into Miami, and then into the European swing? We have to wait and see, but the positive signs are there. These cars are a little bit more on edge, a little bit more nippy. He likes the look of them. It's less like the ground effect cars, which he struggled with, and more like the start of the hybrid era, end of the hybrid era, where they were really, really nippy, these cars, and it looks like he likes it. It looks like he can race the car well, and he can strangle the neck of it. So really, really impressive 3-4 for Ferrari. Positive steps, improvement to be made, obviously, to close the gap to Mercedes, but you can't be too upset with 3 and 4 in back-to-back races, considering how far ahead the Mercedes is. And look, it's almost like they've closed the gap in some way as well. Like, I look at Australian Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc's 13 back of Kimi, 15 back of Georgie, who wins the race. Hamilton's the second back of that. I know the gap was bigger in this race, and obviously they fought harder, but they look like a much better, quicker side. They looked racy in both the sprint and the full GP. And I just think there's positive signs. There's only up from here, because they're they're looking at a very consistent package. I think that's really good for Ferrari. It's weird that they're not quick on the straights. Mercedes are the quickest team in the straights, but they're so much quicker in the corners. And George Russell did say it. They are so quick where they need to be. And if they can be 2/10 quicker on the straights, we've got a car that's going to be very, very hard to pass. And it's going to be a car that can follow well and stay within the grasps of the Mercedes. If they can pick up a 10th or two, as I said, in that month gap to Mercedes in terms of straight line speed, I can't wait to when we get to Monaco, when we get to the new Madrid circuit in Spain, because they're going to be really close. And they're going to be a team that if they can keep getting this jump off the line, how can you pass a team that's the quickest by a long way in the corners and has enough straight line speed with that boost mode to stay in front? It's going to be really, really interesting to watch this season as it progresses. Next, talking about Ollie Behrman. Fantastic race again from the Brit driver. P5 in this race here. When Verstappen had gotten through the field again for a second time, he was around 2 to 3 seconds back of Behrman, but I was looking at the time sheet. He never closed the gap within a second. Ollie Behrman had consistent pace. He stayed so long on those hard compound times, only making the one stop in this race here. Let me just have a quick look on how long he went on the tyres. He pitted on lap 10 under that safety car and went all the way to the end of that set of tyres. Like, crazy effort from him. As did, I guess, a fair few drivers as well. But the consistent pace that he showed, once again, absolutely dominating his teammate on the weekend. I predicted Esteban Ocon to be the good from the weekend. I thought he might bounce back. He had a really good result here in Shanghai last year. But look, he avoids a big crash with Isaac Hadjar in lap 1. He's all the way down in 13th. Works his way up the field. Benefits off the safety car, getting that free stop, as did basically the whole field. So it wasn't like he was the only one that benefited from that. Went a little bit longer on that set of hard times, but never really looked under threat from anyone else on the grid. As I said, Verstappen was close to him, but never really closed that gap within sort of 2 to 3 seconds. Pierre Gasly remained 2 and a bit seconds back of him. He just held that gap. He was so smart in his tyres. Avoiding the crash showed a lot of maturity. The fact they just didn't drive into Isaac Hadjar that was facing sideways in front of him on lap 1. He consistently put in consistent laps. On a high deg circuit that is front left limited, showed so much composure to take that car long. I just think how unfazed he looks in that Haas car, that I think is a really racy car. I think that in weekends, they're going to be the 4th fastest car on the grid. You're going to have the big 3, obviously, but you're going to have them, 4th fastest some weeks. Some weeks it'll be the Red Bull. Some weeks it might even be the Alpines. But look, they're going to be the 4th fastest car on a lot of weekends, as they were this weekend, but capitalising on opportunities like this weekend where the McLarens both didn't get the start, where Verstappen has a DNF, where opportunities open up with the safety car to get a P5 and get massive points, bulk point 10 on a race like this is just super impressive. And as it currently stands, he is 5th in the drivers' standing, 17 points ahead of Lando, ahead of Max, ahead of big names like Oscar Piastri, Isaac Hadjar. Pierre Gasly had a fantastic start of the season. He's a more of an experienced driver, but Ollie Behrman is clear of him as well. And he's clearly looked the 5th best driver on the grid, so he deserves to be where he is. I just think overall that Haas package looks really, really good. I think we'll be seeing them, if we get one of those crazy races when it's wet, potentially see them on the podium. I'm still not totally convinced it's the best package in the corners, but he makes it look smooth the way that Ollie Behrman drives. But the top end speed is really good. With the Haas, it's racing in a straight line. It's got the ability to overtake. We've seen some great overtakes already this season from Ollie Behrman. And it reminds me of one, I'm talking about Behrman, talk about the Haas and Alpine 2x2 battle that we had in the early moments there. There's both Haas's, both Alpines, and Max Verstappen from lap 18 to lap 20, going back and forth. Behrman eventually onto lap 22 went up to P5, but we had Gasly, we had Colapinto, had a great start to the race. Esteban Ocon in the early moments when he didn't pit originally under the safety car, just going hammer and tongs at each other there, really getting their elbows out. It was Colapinto and Ocon on older tyres, more used tyres. It was Gasly who pitted earlier, with Behrman and Max Verstappen on fresher tyres, and it was just a great watch. the seesawing battle. And I think the way that Ollie Behrman got through that, 5-way scrap with some of the switcheroos and the over and unders he did, and braking early and getting the accelerator earlier as well. Slow entry, fast exit, like all the old school moves he had on display there. We saw it a lot down into the hairpin, at times through sector 2 as well, getting his elbows out and getting past cars. He looks, really racy. He looks quite aggressive as well, but not the stupid aggressive in terms of he's going to make mistakes and cost himself the race. And I just think overall, once again, showed himself to be quite a complete driver. And I guess he's in the unfortunate situation that Ferrari right now look really, really solid. And Lewis Hamilton, once again, looks solid. Look, if we had the Lewis Hamilton of last season, again this year, and we might still see that he had a great start to life at Ferrari this time last year. But if we see what the Ferrari is doing and how Hamilton's going about things this season, he might have to buy his time, because Hamilton looks like he might be there for another 3 years if he keeps going the way he's going and the way these cars are being driven. Ollie Behrman will have to buy his time, but he's looking like a driver that can just step straight into that Ferrari and get the job done. He looks unfazed. He looks composed under pressure. He makes the big moves. He's not afraid of the big moves, but he's also not rash and going to get damage to the car and throw away a race with poor mistakes. And I just think it just shows such maturity, similar to what Kimi showed in this race here. He's got the complete package. As a 20-year-old, to do what he's doing right now is superb. I think the Haas team will be over the moon. And a fair play to Haas as well. They made a very, very good car that Ollie Behrman's obviously showcasing to the maximum. I think he's exceeding what the Haas car can actually do. But he's just taking what's in front of him and maximising it. And that's what good drivers do. He had a great weekend. Alpine had a great weekend. Double points for them this weekend with Pierre Gasly in P6. And in the end, Franco Colapinto, despite being shunted off by Esteban Ocon, getting a P10. They, in the sprint, it was... Who picked up the points in the sprint? They missed out, in the sprint, but it was Pierre Gasly in 11th and Colapinto in 14th. But they qualified well in the sprint, qualified well for the main race, got double points in the main race. A really, really solid weekend for them, fighting back from, obviously, especially for Colapinto, tough times last season at Alpine, but a tough first week at Albert Park. And Pierre Gasly, once again, stringing together some great results back-to-back now. He is P7 in the driver's standings with 9 points. Really impressive for the Alpine side. They've got a strong enough package. They were fighting well with the Haas. It looked very even in terms of pace with the Haas. Singular point, finishing P10 in race 1, and then getting up into... P6 in this race here. So really, really good from Pierre Gasly. Great racing again from the Alpine side alongside the Haas, I said, through that 18, 19, 20 and into 21 as well. All 4 of the cars going head to head there. I loved Colapinto's race. Got the elbows out when he needed to. A really good start. Defended well, especially to Russell as well. When Russell try to get past him on the restart of the safety car, it took him a while. It wasn't just a slam dunk move. Maybe that's due to the new regulations and the energy deployment, but he held that position quite well. And whenever he was under pressure, got the elbows out, raced really hard. And the comeback led on there when he was P13 when he got spun around by Esteban Ocon. But to stabilize, settle, and then get up to P10. Yes, he was a lap down, but a really, really great race from Franco Colapinto to accompany Pierre Gasly. So Alpine, this is more like it in terms of what we thought from them. Pierre Gasly in a P6 is, once again, obviously benefiting from the McLarens not being there, but a really, really good week for them. They looked quick throughout the whole weekend. They got cars into Q3 and SQ3. Race pace wasn't that far off their qualifying pace, so that's really good to see. And I think when you look at this team going forward, it's sort of hard to pinpoint what their strength and the weaknesses currently is right now. But that top end speed, you always see in the speed traps, they're one of the highest teams in terms of the raw pace. They've got that raw pace with the Mercedes engine. They've shown ability to race. They can go side by side. They can take the race to opposing cars. So it's looking like a very, very promising season for this Alpine team. And if there's more of this to come, well, let's just get excited because Colapinto's looking better. Gasly's looking superb. I think he's found his sort of comfort zone here. It was a tough few seasons at Alpine. He was always someone that was overperforming. He's overperformed yet again in this race here, but he's got a car now that can consistently compete in the points. I'm really happy to see that. I'm happy to see what he can do this year. 9 points in 2 races. Colapinto in the points for the first time at Alpine. Really, really good weekend for them. Quickly talk about Alonso and Aston Martin. Clips of him taking his hands off the steering wheel to deal with those vibrations. I'm really worried with this Aston Martin. I still have Williams as more disappointing. They've obviously got a point this weekend. 2 points this weekend. But the talk about Adrian Newey and the promise for 2026 and this Aston Martin being a competitive car and wanting to, take it to McLaren in 2026 and where they currently are with this Honda engine, this overall package, it's a big worry. That the fact that Fernando Alonso is waving Sergio Perez past and driving with no hands on the steering wheel because of how bad the vibrations were is just a huge, huge worry. I think it was around lap 30 or so, he had to retire the car. He got it back to the pit lane in the end, but to see what he had to do, and Fernando Alonso is a competitor. He never wants to retire the car. He never wants to give up. And the fact that he's having to retire due to the damage that this car is causing to his physical health is such a big worry. Aston Martin have got an absolute mountain to climb, and it really is an embarrassment with all the names they've got, with the drivers they've got and the promises they've made for this season. And once again, for Fernando Alonso to be stuck in this situation, he must be thinking, what have I done to the Formula One god to be once again stuck with an awful Honda engine and a car that's it is undrivable, this Aston Martin Honda car. It's not even a hyperbole. It is undrivable. He has to take his hands off the steering wheel to keep his body healthy to deal with the vibration of this car. It is so embarrassing. Lance Stroll having technical problems early in the race as well. He had to retire in lap 11, which sent out the safety car. But it's just an embarrassment where they currently are. And it's such a big name. Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso, Adrian Newey, Honda once again returned to the sport with their customer Aston Martin, with how poor everything's been. The aero package, it's sliding all over the place. The vibrations of the engine, the lack of power of the engine. And the fact that Fernando Alonso is having to give up in races, I think it must be killing him. He's laughing through the pain. You're seeing that with him waving through Sergio Perez, with him trying to crack jokes in the interviews. But it is so hard for a man that deserves the world in terms of the way he races and what he does for the sport and how consistent he's been at the age he is. It's really sad to see him struggle once again with a car that's not giving him what he deserves. So, shame on you, Aston Martin. And I hope Alonso can see out this season, because the damage this car must be doing to him for him to give up and retire says a lot about what this car currently is. It is a big, big worry for Alonso, for Aston Martin, Adrian Newey, for Honda. They're going to their home circuit now in Japan. Think about the highs of last year where the partnership ended with Red Bull. They got their win with Max Verstappen, and now where they currently are with this Aston Martin side and their own engine. It's an embarrassment, really is. They got massive steps to make over that month gap over April, because if they come back and it's still vibrating the way it's vibrating, if it still looks as undrivable as it does in terms of in the corners as well, you can almost put a line through Aston Martin this year. It's almost more danger them being on the grid right now than them just being off the grid. It's such a shame. Speaking about a shame, McLaren, a double did not start. 2 separate electrical engine faults. Oscar Piastri yet to start a race this season. Lando Norris unable to start. They couldn't get him out initially. Then Piastri gets to the grid. Then they've got a different electrical error message on the engine. It's a big worry because Mercedes engine has looked so good, almost bulletproof. We got signs this weekend. Russell getting stuck in first gear in Q3. Anthony complaining of some energy, deployment problems through the sprint as well. So it's not going to be bulletproof. We're in a new regulation. It's not going to be perfect, but both did not start with both separate electrical problems on the same weekend. It might just be fate, or not even fate, like just unlucky timing, but it's a long way for McLaren to go because they are literally Formula 3 right now. It's Formula 1 with McLaren, Mercedes, Formula 2 with Ferrari, and they're in Formula 3. Look, it's not as bad as Red Bull. We'll finish up talking about them last, but they look so far off it. They look so slow in a straight line considering the engine they've got in the car. These two drivers, from the sounds of it, are not too upset in terms of they reckon they're maximising everything they can do with this car. The car's just not responding back and giving them enough back. P5, P6 in quali for the main race, P3 and P5 in sprint quali. So they're doing the best they possibly can. The McLaren cars, I think, I'll get into my driver ratings, obviously releasing on Wednesday, but I can't fault these drivers. They've done everything they possibly could this weekend. I think they've maximised the speed of the car. Their quali pace looks a little bit quicker than their race pace in terms of, we saw in the sprint race, they really went nowhere in that race there, and Lando in the end lucky with timing of pit stops and the like to get ahead of Kimi and hold ahead of Kimi, and Oscar probably should have been ahead of Kimi Antonelli in terms of having to give that position back despite Kimi making a mistake on the restart. So they did all right in the sprint race, but we saw that race pace not quite beat in terms of keeping up with the Mercedes, and in particular not keeping up with the Ferraris. Can they get better? Absolutely. We saw the last of the 3 seasons, the strides they've made to be a much more competitive and then being the best team on the grid. So we know they can claw back that differential. But this was a tough weekend for McLaren. They're going to have to respond big time in Japan. And look, they might respond and get a podium in Japan at some point over that weekend, whether that be qualifying in the top 3 or finishing in the top 3. I just don't think their race pace is good enough. They might nick a P3 in a qualifying, but I just don't think of a race distance that car is solid enough, quick enough, good enough to go with the top 2. So there's going to be worries there for McLaren, how far behind they really are, and if they didn't do enough in terms of focusing on this season last year and the years gone by, where it looks like Mercedes have put all their eggs in this basket and nailed it, and Ferrari have done enough to get a very, very competitive car. Like, those two cars look raceable, they look solid. The McLaren just looks just really hard to get to grips with and to be fast. It just doesn't look like a fast car. It looks like a really, really mediocre car, which is a massive shame because look, we love watching the battle at the front between Piastri and Norris last year and seeing the Ferraris go racing, and because they've got really nothing to lose because they can't make the top 2, I would have loved to see Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri go at it as well, because what we could have seen yesterday was a fact of, the 2 Mercedes are clear, so let them go race. Let the McLarens go race each other because they're not even near the Ferraris, and the Ferraris can go race each other because they're not near the Mercedes and not have any threat from the McLarens. And we know how much you lose a lap if you go racing and have that sort of ding-dong battle, but I think these 2 McLaren drivers would have had a field day and would have put up more entertainment going, side by side through large periods, because they are in their world of their own. They are well and truly quicker than the Red Bull and the Haas and the Alpine. They're nowhere near the Ferrari, nowhere near the Mercedes. So we might get some great racing between these 2 cars this year, but look, one start from I guess 4 opportunities in GPs, big problem for them. They need to get back on track, try and find some speed in this car here to be more competitive over race distances, and then have a crack as we move over to Japan, because it's a big worry how far off they are, and the fall off is real right now. And the panic station and the panic button, I think, has been hit. They need to get to grips with this new regulation, this new car, and this new engine, and maximise. Again, they're a team that's going to put a lot of work, I reckon, in that month gap. They're going to go back to HQ and try and see how best they can maximise Mercedes engine, because they are so far off the customer. They're so far off the constructor as the customer team. And then finally, a team that's really far off it as well is Red Bull. Verstappen, DNF, awful weekend for him. He looks like Lewis Hamilton last season, just absolutely defeated. Awful start off the line again. 2 weekends in a row now. He just hasn't got off the line. Hadjar spinning during the first lap. In the end, Hadjar, it was a bit of a survival job and a recovery job to get up into P8. So 4 points for him. He'll take that. The sprint race, both missed out. Verstappen in 9th. Hadjar way down the grid. And the thing is, look, the Ford engine, it's going to take time to get used to it. We've seen the blow up of Hadjar's car race 1 and Verstappen here in race 2. You're going to get that. You're going to get the teething problems, but it's the fact that the package is just undrivable. You see Max is fighting this car so hard, and he falls all the way down the grid off the start, then fights all the way back, takes that pit stop. Then there's the safety car, so he loses out to that as well. Then fights his way back up to P6, trying to compete with Behrman, but unable to close a gap to Ollie Behrman. Saying how he wants to fight the Alpines. It's such a shame because, and I hate the criticism that Max Verstappen is getting right now because everyone's like, oh, he couldn't drive one of the worst cars in the grid. He couldn't win a race with one of the worst cars in the grid. Look, this car really could be the worst car in the grid. It probably looked at the 6 quickest on the weekend. Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Haas, Alpine, even RB, then Red Bull. Like, you're looking at the 6th, 7th fastest car on the grid. It is so hard. You see each corner, the back end wants to step out. You're getting these washes of oversteer in the car in high-speed corners. Top-end speed's not there. The energy deployment's not there. You see out of corners how the car sort of ticks over and can't get up to speed. It's a real handful right now, and they're nowhere near it. And you've lost big name. Helmut Marko's gone. Christian Horner's gone. Adrian Newey's gone. So big names have left the company, and the identity maybe has changed, but the vibes may have changed, the identity's changed. But we're so used to Red Bull being such a competitive, racy car, hard to beat, competitive. And Max did his absolute most there to get it into P6 and try and keep it there. And then for his car to fail on him right towards the end of that race there, lap 46, 10 or so laps to go is such a bummer, such a massive bummer, because he did so much for that car there to get it where it was and to fight it all the way back up to that position there. I just think they've got so many problems to solve right now. I don't know where to start. The start's awful. The energy deployment and energy recharge is not there as well. Top end speed is not there. But I think for me, first, I have to get it right in the corners, because Max Verstappen can wrangle and strangle the most out of a really, really average car in the straights. He's done it for basically his whole time at Red Bull. They never really had a fast car. They always had a quick car in the corners, never really a top-end speed car, but he always found a way to make it raceable. He would always find a way to over-race that car into a top position. But this car, even in the corners, it's the back end steps out, it's oversteering, then understeering, and you can't get on the power, and you're getting wheel spin, you're running wide because it's just so all over the place. The balance looks off, the grip looks off. It just looks like an absolute headache. And Max Verstappen doesn't drive cars that are headaches. He drives cars that are on the edge and then he can make the most out of. So I think for them, number one has to make the balance and the overall feel of this car much better. Then you can start working on the top end speed, the energy recharge, the deployment and stuff like that. Because with all that rubbish, that obviously does make a massive impact on these modern day cars, Verstappen at least wants a car that he can race and he feels happy in, because right now he looks miserable in this Red Bull car because it is not raceable. It is undrivable. It looks like an absolute basket case. It's not just him, it's Hadjar as well. And they're pretty close into each other in terms of their one lap pace and race pace. It just is that the Red Bull is not in the top 4 fastest cars right now. They are not there. They're in their own field and on their own fight. They're a midfield team right now in terms of the way the car is, how quick the car is in one lap pace, in race pace. In general, it is awful for Red Bull Racing right now. And they've got a lot of work to do with Ford in the factory on the aero package, and to make this car at least relevant again. Because the fact that 4 points in the race and 8th place from Isaac Hadjar looks like a really, really solid result says a lot about where this team has fallen from, where they were fighting at the front and pushing Lando Norris all the way to the driver's title to where they are now, and behind the RB, and feel like behind the RB on raw pace as well. It's a real big problem for Red Bull Racing going forward. So they've got a massive job to do coming into Japan to try and fix up this season. And keep Max Verstappen invested, because as it currently stands, I think he will be leaving the sport potentially middle of the season if the car keeps being this bad. He hates the regulations. He hates his car. The car looks undrivable. You could be seeing Max leaving middle of the season as it currently stands, and that's a massive shame for the sport and a huge loss for Red Bull, because you can't just replace Max Verstappen, 4-time champion, one of the great drivers we've ever seen on the racetrack, and one of the greatest drivers to drive and get the most out of this Red Bull package. So they got a lot of problems to address, and I want to see them address it very, very fast, because they're slipping into mediocrity as we currently stand right now. But with that being said, let's jump into my predictions and review them. Obviously, the predictions for this weekend were a bit more extensive with sprint race and sprint qualifying as well. So I predicted Russell on sprint pole, nailed that. Russell sprint win, nailed that as well. Look, at that point in time, I thought it was going to be a real one-way street this weekend. So George Russell absolutely owning the weekend. And I thought Mercedes, their gap to Ferrari was growing even bigger and bigger. I predicted pole position for Kimi Antonelli. Nailed that in the head as well. Obviously, due to probably George Russell only getting one run at it and having that car restart problem, and his car was stuck in first gear, but Kimi in the end coming out on top in terms of qualifying, and nailed that. I did think George would come back through the field and finish P1 of the race. That didn't happen. I thought Charles Leclerc would separate the Mercedes. That didn't happen. I thought Kimi Antonelli would be P3. That didn't happen as well. Big shame there. Wasn't able to get those ones right. I sort of wish I backed myself in and went Kimi Antonelli to win from pole, but that's all right. This is where I really had the stinkers. The good I had Esteban Ocon. Thought he did very well in Shanghai and China last year. It always was a theme of Haas's season last year. They went back and forth. One race good for one driver, one race good for the other driver. That might not happen this season. Ollie Bevan looks at a class of his own. He looks like a good 5-6 tenths quicker than Esteban Ocon on any given day. So Esteban Ocon being the good was nowhere near it. He was behind Valtteri Bottas in the Cadillac, between both Cadillacs and P14, and giving himself damage, crashing into Franco Colapinto, who just come out of the pits. A really, really awful weekend for Esteban Ocon. And also went the ugly, being Liam Lawson. If I flipped them around, I reckon I would have nailed it on the head. Liam Lawson had a superb weekend in the RB, finishing in P7. Again, ran his own race in a world of his own. It was 20 seconds back of Pierre Gasly, 7 seconds ahead of Isaac Hadjar. Just ran his own race, did his job, kept out of trouble. Double points finished for him in terms of finished in the points in P7 for the sprint, and also P7 in the main race. A really, really good race from a man that can go on the radar, and probably did go onto the radar from Melbourne, because everyone was talking about Arvid Lindblad and his debut race and how well he did there. But perfect response for Liam Lawson, putting together a very, very consistent race. Solid throughout, no mistakes, good strategy in the sprint race, and really good in his tyres. I think this was a front left limited race, and all the drivers that got up there that weren't sort of the big four were really, really good in their tyres, and it showed, because they got the results to show for it. So very, very good race for Liam Lawson. He definitely wasn't the ugly. He was probably the good from the weekend. My random prediction, Lewis in P4. Wish I went Charles. I was close. Lewis Hamilton ended up being in P3, but so I thought he would go well. I just didn't think he'd get the better of Charles Leclerc. I thought Charles Leclerc coming into the weekend looked like the more complete driver, but in the end, Lewis Hamilton showing that China and Shanghai is one of his favourite places for a reason, and getting a great result there on the podium. And then my storyline got wrong as well. I sort of put down the new regulations create for some awful slingshot racing. Look, we got some slingshot racing, but all in all, I don't think the battery had much of an impact, or as much of an impact as that's what we saw in Australia in terms of lifting off and cars Mario Karting past each other. It was a really, really good race in terms of cars could follow, cars could overtake, cars could stay with each other, and it wasn't quite back and forth slingshotting. There was to a degree in terms of the energy deployment, but overall it was down to drivers' ability to get on the brakes later and get the elbows out and hold it into corners and stay solid over the lap distance and run deep over the race distance on those hard tyres. So it wasn't quite awful racing. It was actually quite superb racing. And I'll finish on that note there. Look, I'm still have my opinions on the energy and the recharge and deployment and that whole part of things. But as I'll say once again, and make it very clear, I think this new aero package, I think the active aero, the size and the lightweight nature of the cars have made them so much easier to follow, so much easier to stay within a second and follow cars over lap distances. Yes, your tyres are going to grain, but not to the same extent to which we saw in the ground effect cars. And because of how much lighter and small these cars are, cars can race. They can go side by side. And that's made for some great racing between Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, between the two Alpines and the two Haas's. And it's going to make for, these energy recharge, boost, and overtake modes to actually be effective, because you can stay within a second, you can stay close to cars and actually use your battery to get past them. So congratulations to the Formula One bosses for making this new style of car and weight of car and design of car really good and conducive to racing. Again, I'm still split on the whole battery recharge and deployment thing, but overall, made for some really, really good racing. And we got one of the best races I've seen in a very, very long time yesterday in China. So very, very good race. Congratulations to Kimi Antonelli winning it from pole. Congratulations to Lewis Hamilton getting his first podium in Ferrari. We've got Lewis back to prime form. We've got Ferrari close enough in race pace to the Mercedes. We've got great side-by-side racing between the Ferraris. We've got the Alpines and the Haas's competing. We've got Ollie Behrman and Pierre Gasly overachieving. We've got the McLarens and the Red Bull struggling. It's going to be a real great seesawing type season. That's what we love about new regulations, new storylines, new protagonists, new things to think about. And it's created for some really, really entertaining and intriguing start to the season. That's just my thoughts, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Remember, driver ratings will come out on Wednesday here in the channel. Obviously, got a bigger gap between this race and Japan. So over next week, I'll maybe put out a video of maybe updated thoughts and power rankings or my thoughts on the overall start of the season before we get into it once again for the following week where we have Japan race week. But another great race week wrapped up. As I said, love to hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys for a video, live reaction, prediction video very, very soon. Till next time, guys. See you later.